Our final speaker is Chaim, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Ben-Gurion University and Director of the Center for the Study of Conversion and Interreligious Encounters.
Thank you very much. I will mention Maimonides.
You will?
I will. But,
no escape.
But further on in my remarks, sorry, glasses without that. I would like to thank Benny Porat for his thought-provoking presentation, which allowed me to revisit topics and ideas which I've been thinking about for a long time. He also decided to concentrate on one of the most interesting and challenging periods for a historian interested in how religions form and develop, and I thank him for that as well. This is also an opportunity to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me to come and taking me away from my daily chores, which nowadays take the form of academic administration and more academic administration. Before diving in, I would like to preface my remarks by saying that though I try and use a varied box of tools when thinking about things in general and religion in particular, I am a medieval historian by training, and my fields of interest are not strictly halakha or legal systems. The terminology that I'm familiar with is not legal, and I take context, as you'll see in the continuation, seriously. I'm definitely not a jurist in theologians' robes, and I'd like to say we talked about this as well before. It's interesting to see how, in this session as well, how I think our comments are going to be pretty similar, right? The things that we think about the paper, but we're coming to them from very different perspectives. And I think that has to do with our training, and that's perhaps where we're very, very different from the scholars and people that we've been talking about over the past few days, who seem to have been able to, who combined in their persona both a lot of different abilities and training. Okay. Hence, my remarks might not reflect very well the arguments set out by Benny, and for that, my apologies. However, my reading of Benny's arguments set off what is, I think, a fruitful chain of thought, and it is this that I want to share with you now. If I understand Benny correctly, his central argument is that changing concepts of God and the characteristics and structures of legal systems, in this case the Jewish legal system, are interrelated. Where one can put a finger on changes in how God is conceived, one will find changes in the legal system as well, or vice versa. The movement from the biblical God who speaks via the prophets with a clear message to the rabbinic God who is hidden and leaves it to the human intellect to interpret his will, correlates with the changes in the legal system which encourages commentary and dispute, sorting and categorizing, allowance for error, amongst other things. The systemic legal foundations which demonstrate the correlation with the change in the concept of God and are unique to the theology of the sages are the study of the legal system for which one receives a reward, the categories of ab initio and after the effect, and the extraterritorial application of the law. And I will say that I'm also basing my remarks on the written text that we received. I would like to raise a number of issues which, in my opinion, muddy the waters a little, and will perhaps provide a basis for further discussion afterwards. Okay, firstly, is the God, or in brackets, gods, of the Bible or biblical period that different from the God or gods of the sages? In other words, can such a clear distinction be made between the God of the Bible and the God of the rabbis? Is there one rabbinic God, or is there more than just one conception of God in the Tanaitic period? Is the God of the rabbis really a hidden God, or is he very present and involved in this world? Can we read rabbinic texts in a monolithic way, forgetting that they reflect hundreds of years of theological and legal development, changing historical circumstances, and eventually an editing process which clearly reflects the views of those who took part in it? In my opinion, one does not have to look hard to see multifarious concepts of God in rabbinic materials, from Midrashei Halacha to Agadah, from Philo, where does he fit in here, okay, and Paul, to the Merkava and Hechalot literature. There are plenty of midrashic stories where God, in any number of personas or extensions, intervenes. And this also happens even in more strictly halachic texts, even in those very texts which attempt to define rabbinic authority to create their legal revolution. For example, Menachot 29b, which is the very famous passage of Moses going up to heaven, seeing God, adding the tittles to the letters, and then there's a whole. I won't go into that now. It's a fascinating passage, actually. In rabbinic literature, God is very much to be found in this world and can be manipulated using magic, writing amulets, controlling demons, in medicine, astrology, in birth and in death. Moreover, the rabbis who were involved in creating the legal system and who disputed matters, often over hundreds of years on the very same Talmudic page, held very different and sometimes even opposing views of God, as well as very different understandings of what being a Jew means and what is expected of a Jew. To my mind, this complicates matters considerably, and this is before we even get into complex and theologically charged questions related to the very idea of monotheism in the Bible and biblical era and in the early rabbinic literature. Secondly, juxtaposing the sages with the prophets is problematic historically as well as conceptually. Biblical prophecy seems to come to an end early in the Second Temple period. The sages appear on the scene in the 1st century BC. Moreover, do the prophets create a legal system? In the Pentateuch, the legal system is presented as being developed by Moses, the lawgiver. If we take that as a given and not get into the sticky questions of how and when the Pentateuch was written and compiled, the biblical prophets are not really seen as lawgivers, but more as miracle workers, bearers of messages of impending disaster, comfort, or calls for repentance. If anything, those who uphold the law, develop its structures and daily implementation, are the kings and priests, who are in brackets in your presentation, and it is the latter who control access to God. It is the priests who police the boundaries of the faith, who is accepted and who is not, who is pure and who is impure, who God wants and who is unwanted. In general, biblical law reflects an agricultural society led by a priestly order which tries to placate God via sacrifice, rituals, and other offerings, and order society and their own well-being around the temple cult. It should also be noted that the priests, as would the sages, intensely disliked prophets. See Jesus, for example. Because if too charismatic, they can easily upset the balance of power and the true order of things. Even in the Bible, divine intervention in deciding legal issues is pretty rare. And I would hazard a guess that there are not many more occurrences of it in the Bible than in rabbinical literature. Indeed, divine intervention seems to be the exception rather than the rule. Hence, if anything, the legal activities of the sages reflect the necessary changes in the access to the divine, lost with the destruction of the Second Temple, and the need to redefine the relationship between man and God. The legal structure as it develops is a reflection of human needs, rather than reflecting a new concept of the divine, which, as suggested above, is not easily described or defined. Thirdly, and perhaps for me the most important, we cannot deal with development of the Jewish legal system or even theology and concepts of God in this period without taking Christianity into account. Both Judaism and Christianity represent two opposing exegetical interpretations of the same text, the Bible. Two different worldviews, an understanding of the development of history and God's place in the world. In Christianity, God takes flesh, redeems, and abrogates the law. For the sages, God has not yet redeemed the world, hence the necessity of developing a legal and social framework that will provide leadership and identity and replace the loss of the temple till the time of the future redemption. It is these two conflicting worldviews which seemingly develop side by side, yet in these foundational centuries are often intertwined, which are the main stimuli for theological developments regarding the divinity. These two religions developed over hundreds of years and are far from being homogeneous from the outset. Hence, I think there is no point in trying to find some overarching theory regarding the divinity. Yet by needing to deny the Christian claims vis-a-vis the Trinity and the Incarnation, which again is something which developed over time, Jewish sages had to develop their own answers and conceptions of the divine, both in a theological sense and regarding the place of divinity within history. Biblical interpretation, which forms the basis of both emerging religions almost from their inception, becomes a battlefield where theological lines are drawn, methodologies of interpretation are developed, and polemical argumentation refined. The historical circumstances which determined that Christianity would become the religion of the Roman Empire dictated the need for a Jewish legal structure which would police the boundaries, protect its communities, and minimize religious contamination. The development of a theology of exile necessitated integrating the legal system into daily life in a manner which provided structure and a sense of identity, and also provided hope for a better future. The Jewish legal system, or halakha, develops the way it does because of the historical circumstances of the exile, and therefore, I think, is not really concerned with God beyond harnessing him to the fundamentally revolutionary exegetical moves, and all to do with human power structures and identity. The rabbis, along with their Christian counterparts, are working to create power bases and communities who will adhere to their message and understanding of events, and, as I said earlier, are reacting in particular to the loss of the Second Temple. In my opinion, if there is a major change in the concept of God, and I'm not sure how this plays out in the structures of the legal system, then it happens in the Muslim sphere of influence, with the rise of Jewish philosophy and intellectual giants such as the Gaonim. It is Maimonides who provides us with a paradigm change in how God is thought about or conceived. God becomes far more abstract, unknowable, hidden, disengaged, and distant, and we find ourselves with a new positive commandment to know God. But does this change affect the underlying structure of halakha, or work within its already well-established and accepted norms? Maimonides' attempt to define principles of faith, not the first to do this, but perhaps the most successful, is part of a new way forward in Judaism. But again, does it change that underlying structure or create new ways of halakhic thinking? The reaction to Maimonides, or perhaps to the spread of philosophical teachings within Judaism, was, in my opinion, the rise of Kabbalah, which, for reasons of convenience, I will refer to as homogeneous, even though from the outset it was anything but. Within early Kabbalah, which appears on the historical stage in Provence in the late 12th century, there develops a new way of thinking about God and how the divine works in creation, history, and in relation to man, which stands in opposition to the Maimonidean conception. The idea of the Ein Sof and Sfirot, put simply, is a fascinating response to the God of Maimonides. But does this sea change influence the underlying structures of halakha? One of the most popular genres of early Kabbalah was the Ta'amei HaMitzvot literature, which, as its name indicates, tries to explain the rationale for the 613 commandments, connecting the performance of these commandments to the Sphirotic world. But while this would have an effect on custom and praxis, like prayer for example, there is no challenge or attempt to undermine the structure of Jewish law as set out for us by Benny in his paper. Some concluding remarks. Thinking about what Benny presented today leads me to reflect on the present and to thoughts about how the underlying structures of Jewish law correlate with concepts of God today. Now, almost every word in the previous sentence is loaded. What is Jewish today? Mind you, that could be asked of other periods as well. Are we talking about Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Chabad, Breslav, or whatever combination of the aforementioned? What is Jewish law in the 21st century? And who are those with the authority to decide? What or who am I referring to when talking about God? The God being searched for by man in Heschel's writing, the God of the halachic man of Soloveitchik, Yeshayahu Leibovich's God, the God of Jewish feminism, the list is endless. Are we talking about Judaism in Israel, a notion which in and of itself is problematic, which supposedly should reflect the return to the Promised Land, or are we referring to Judaism as lived by Jews in the diaspora? But let us suppose that all the aforementioned issues are resolved, and we all know what it is we're talking about when we use the terms God, Jewish, law, and today. And how do we even start to examine the correlations between the concept of God and the characteristics of the Jewish legal system? Is one connected to the other in any meaningful way which advances our understanding of either? Has there been a paradigm shift in halakha which also reflects a change in how God is conceived following the Holocaust and with the foundation of the State of Israel? Was the foundation of the State of Israel a defining moment, which changed the way God was perceived, from the hidden God of the Holocaust to the God revealed in the miraculous return to Zion? Have these events also affected the structure of halakha? Has the messianic ideal, which has swept elements of the religious rite, particularly following the Six-Day War, changed the structures of the halachic system and concepts of the divine? I have to admit to being left with more questions than answers when reading Benny's thought-provoking paper. But isn't that the very essence of what we're supposed to be doing here?